Okay, we'll start in just a minute here. Welcome, everybody. Okay, my name is Jim West. Welcome. Today is July 31st, and today we're going to be talking about go to market or go home winning strategies for Biotools startups. The topic here today is really about go to market strategies and product market fit and how those work together to create a successful product launch, and hopefully a good moat and growing market position. I'm excited to be joined here today with my panelists. First, we have Courtney Jackson, an independent consultant, but spent many years at BD in the field working on these exact topics. We also have Jeff Galecke at i5 Biopartners, a new program sponsor of Biotools Innovator. So welcome and thank you, Jeff. And we also have Mike Gordon at Real Reactor, an alumni from 2023, here to share some of his personal stories along the way. So let's go ahead and meet everybody. Courtney, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us about a little bit of your past and some of the things you're excited to talk about today.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So I started my career over 15 years ago in life sciences R&D. So I worked at the bench developing products, and many of these products that are used now in the market. Along the way, though, I realized that I wanted to be closer to the actual people using the tools. That curiosity led me into commercial leadership roles, getting closer to the customer. So I've had the opportunity to launch many products and to guide startups through diligence, acquisition, all the way to launch from the strategic acquire end. So what drives me is helping, bring these breakthrough technologies to market that really improve lives. So excited to be here and have the conversation.
All right, thanks, Courtney. And Jeff, tell us about yourself.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so I've spent over 2 decades commercializing kits, reagents, as well as platforms into the life sciences space, both at large public companies that you guys would all be familiar with, as well as some smaller family-owned businesses. At i5 Bio, I specifically am bringing a little bit more of a interesting take on the consulting side of things. We're sort of full scale commercialization, and I bring sort of the sales voice and really advocate for getting things like your messaging and go to market strategy done as early as possible. Even before hiring your sort of sales and BD resources. Um, we really believe in expanding your community and have well over 5,000 connections on LinkedIn within our sort of group that we have. And we also kind of differentiate ourselves by providing data-driven insights, right? So we try to build process into the organization and enable you to scale by having ways to measure, are you getting better over time? So that's kind of our approach, and here to kind of help whoever needs it to take that next step. So.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. And last but definitely not least, Mike Gordon.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Mike Gordon. My background is actually engineering, and I got into life sciences in 2013. I became a consultant in that space. So for the last about 12 years, my job is essentially to, invent new technologies. Typically, they're all around manufacturing cell and gene therapies. So create new concepts, prototype, prove feasibility, and so that's been great. And then kind of in parallel, I've been doing my own company called Real Reactor. So Real Reactor is it's essentially a continuous micro batch reactor for life science or sterile biological applications. So at a very high level, if you want to mix multiple liquids for a very specific amount of time, Real Reactor will essentially perform micro encapsulations and flow. And so the output of our reactor would always be the same. So if you want the viral vector applications, 3 liquids for 9 minutes, the output of our reactor would be those three liquids at 9 minutes all day, every day. It's just constantly coming out of that optimal moment. But it's a much more versatile platform than that. But that's the application we're going for right now. And yeah, happy to be here. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. And I'm going to come right back to you, Mike. Before we kind of
Mhm.
get into the meat of everything, just want to remind everybody of the format. So we have 1 hour here on the live stream, and so we've got the full panel for that, and then we will close the live stream and we reserve 30 minutes for the cohort to have more of an intimate discussion with our panelists and bring up any questions they may personally have about the topic. And so, I guess, Mike, I'd like to kind of bring it back to you. You are in a position that I think a lot of life science tool, maybe even much more broadly, a lot of tech companies have, which is they have a product, it solves some problem, but it does something really well, better than other things. But then the big challenge is like, well, okay, so I can't be everything to everybody. I've got to find a spot somewhere to make my market entry. And you have that same problem. So can you maybe just give us a little bit of your story? What was the genesis of the idea, and how did you kind of get to where you are today, figuring out kind of what you believe today to be your sort of product market strategy?
So the concept of real reactor, I actually created about 10 years ago. Yeah, it was a long time ago. However, I didn't really see justification to pursue the idea until an application came along that was a perfect fit. So then I went into to commercial develop it essentially, and that was a journey to actually make it work. But yeah, we are a platform just like a lot of the people on this call, and there's a ton of applications that we can go for. There was that one specific application that inspired me to develop the company because that seems to be a very good fit for us. However, along the journey, there's been between 20 and 30 really good applications that have popped up, not just in life sciences, but actually outside of life sciences as well. And so, we didn't just design a platform for that specific application. Instead, what we did was built what we call a feasibility reactor or feasibility platform, where we built in adjustability to basically meet the needs of almost any application that is in our field. So we can tailor the reactor, we can adjust the reactor and the consumable for, let's say, sterile low flow rate applications, expensive ones where there's DNA. We can also do really aggressive, harsh chemicals, in another industry. And so with this feasibility reactor, we can kind of go out into the field and do short, small, quick tests in these areas and kind of build those business cases. And so that's really our principle. Shoot bullets, not cannonballs. Go out with a feasibility reactor and do all these things and really narrow it down and make sure that we have our killer app. And I don't think it's necessarily realistic to get the best app selected. I feel like we all have to at some point say, all right, this is the one we're going to go with. This is a really good business case and we can do it well and pick it. But yeah, that's where we are. We're in the trenches right now, basically vetting the platform, getting it running across all these different applications and trying to get enough information where we can make that decision that this one application is the one that we should go with.
Thanks, Mike.
Hmm.
Jeff, how do you sort of think about product market fit? What does it mean to you, and how do you kind of know when you have it?
Yeah, I mean, you, it's a complex thing, right? It's not necessarily super easy. I would say typically the things that we look for, you want to be able to obviously do some surveys of the market, of some KOLs, kind of hear that people are excited, about what you're trying, or about what you're offering. Ideally, it's something that is really fitting a need that they don't currently, have a solution for. And I think in the best cases, if you're able to sort of supply a minimum viable product and put it in someone's hands, oftentimes, just doing like surveys, people will say, I think that could work for me, or they'll try and be as enthusiastic as possible. But until you really get someone that the opportunity to kind of like use it and visualize how they would put it into the lab, I think it can be difficult to really get a vision to be kind of like solidified as a true product market fit. I think people do often need to like have it in their hands, play with it, and understand what exactly you're able to do for them.
So
So
it's not just a quantitative thing, it's a bit of a qualitative thing as well.
it's an art form for sure. I think that there's some science around it, and you can do things poorly, right? Like I think surveys are one of the things that are really difficult. Like if you go to a customer, they're gonna oftentimes, not try not to be negative to you about your baby, something that you're bringing to them. Um, but oftentimes it's difficult to like hear the objections that they're actually telling you because a lot of people don't really know how to give that objection in a clear and concise manner. So you have to sort of be listening for the objections, and so a lot of times it is hard for people to kind of hear like, oh no, the end user said they liked that. Well, liking something doesn't mean that it's 5x better and I need to implement this today because it's going to make an impact on my daily life, right? Those are two very vastly different things. And you have to tease that out.
Right. And Mike, I'll get to you and then we'll get to you, Courtney. So Mike, you had a thought. How do you guys do this internally at Real Reactor?
Um, wait, which part internally?
I saw you raise your hand, so I thought you had a comment here, but
No, there was something Jeff said that I agreed with. I forget what it was. It'll come back to me in a sec.
okay,
I was just agreeing with him.
no worries. Okay, thanks. And then Courtney,
Oh, sorry. Yes, brutal feedback. One of the things that I do when I pitch my tech, especially to somebody who is technical, is I ask for brutal, honest feedback up front. I say, don't try to, don't be afraid of hurting my feelings. Keep it honest, and that kind of seems to break the ice, and I do get more constructive criticism that way, which is good.
hmm. So ask for it and you will receive.
Yeah, beware what you wish for. But yeah, it does seem to get me more information that I find useful.
Okay, that's good. And then you got to like be able to hear that your baby's ugly and be okay with that. And
Yeah, exactly.
and Courtney, let's get to you. How about you? What is the big company view? Your markets probably are a little bit, need to be a little bit more defined, maybe big. How do you guys think about this?
Yeah, definitely. So when we're looking at scaling a broader marketing framework, right, for more of a startup, we want to understand what the ambition is, right? So what is the market you're looking to play in? Who are you trying to be in that market? Having a strong understanding of your market, really mapping that out. But I would say one of the first steps that we do in working with a small startup is, if we're ready to go to focus groups, and you heard this from Jeff, Mike around the feedback, it's helpful to do like a blinded focus group where you can sit behind the mirror and with the right professional who really knows how to get those nuggets out from the customers, you can understand quite a lot. And I realize startups are on a budget, so there are many budget friendly options, just making sure you're using professionals that are really great at facilitating the focus groups. There are also other ways to look at product market fit on a budget. You can tag along on conferences, you can pick amazing customers and different types of people that you believe are key to your segment. You can hold, all sorts of things at conferences. You can rent a room. You can do survey work like Jeff mentioned, but it's really helpful to get in there and any sort of prototype, beta instrument, you can get that in customers' hands. Again, if it's blinded, it's helpful if you have a facilitator. That way they can provide that real honest feedback that you need. But again, when you're looking at product market fit, like Jeff said, it's very complex because you're trying to understand what is your market, what type of segments you might want to play in that market, what are you going to prioritize, how does your market fit, What is the differentiated value you bring, right? What does that value offer look like? So I'm big on making sure you have a nice marketing framework when you're working through these tools. And again, that can be scaled for startups.
That's great, Courtney. So, did you guys at the big company, did you also sort of guerrilla style go to conferences and ask researchers like there what they thought about new product ideas or things you guys were thinking about?
Yeah, for sure. Just because you're at a big company, it doesn't mean you have a big budget for your project. So I've been on many projects that are small and scrappy. And so you have to be creative, right? And resourceful. So you're looking at what are areas where we can get to the right customers, on a budget and get real answers from them. And I'm thinking back to like, we had a conference in Europe where we were midway through development. We brought the product, we got in the room, we had the right people recruited to come and provide feedback, more of a user group style um, event, and kept it really casual. And the people were ready to give very honest feedback, right? And they could visualize how this product would or wouldn't fit in their workflow, how it did or didn't fit in their lab, or their budget, and so that was extremely helpful. And it helped us make some pivots mid-project, and that's another thing is being able to pivot and really being part of a test and learn culture where you're testing experiments, does it fit here? Is this the right segment? Is it not? And you're constantly testing that and learning and evolving versus kind of being in a fixed mindset and stuck. You want to be, testing and learning. And I'm sure Mike and Jeff both have a lot of good examples of that.
Did you guys also use the term brutal feedback when you were talking to your focus customers?
Definitely. There were some brutal moments for sure, but it's great. All feedback is a gift, and you want to get that feedback early, when you can pivot and when you haven't invested too much, and it opens up new doors. So, brutal feedback's great.
Jeff, what about you? Do you guys have any other thoughts or strategies? I think you've also got experience doing some conference development as well.
Yeah, I mean, conferences are really big and important. I think, a lot of times what we see people making mistakes with at conferences is, okay, we're here, we're going to have a booth and let people come to us and kind of be static. And I found that, you can do a lot at conferences by, you always need someone to kind of be there and available, but really doing outreach, obviously, ahead of time and setting meetings, but just like walking the posters. I mean, there's so much information at those poster sessions, and walking up to someone, finding out about their research and engaging in conversation. We've developed KOLs via those conversations, right? And it's just because you're person to person, you have a very, an interest in what they're doing, and they want to talk about it, and you can get great connections by doing those types of things, and a lot of people miss that opportunity. Um, and that's actually large companies as well as smaller companies. Sometimes that just doesn't happen. So I think that's absolutely a great way to do it. As Courtney was talking, she mentioned user groups, and I think, that's obviously that fits into our understanding of like building communities. Sometimes, early stage depends on how far along you are. Do you really have enough users? But actually, something we've seen people do relatively early, and you only need maybe 4 or 5 or even 3 or 4 really strong users, who could potentially be on like a facilitated conference call as sort of a roundtable. And if you could even get, a small handful of folks to do a facilitated roundtable, you can get a lot of information, and potentially even, invite some folks who might be potential users, and get new champions, right, for you.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting new way of sort of leveraging the post-COVID world of, how do we do this easily and less expensively? You can potentially reach out to a few folks and turn that into some wins.
Great. Mike, do you have any
Yeah,
sort of
I have
experience?
one more. I have one more comment about the brittle feedback before we move on to the
Okay.
next question. Especially for the empaths, that are listening, don't internalize brutal feedback and take it as fact, because I've gotten feedback from a few people, which is valuable feedback, but you go down the rabbit hole, ask more professionals, and sometimes you just find closed-minded people that give you their opinion, and they're entitled to their opinion. But it's very easy to get derailed from negative feedback. So I would say just don't get discouraged when you get negative feedback. Go and validate it.
Awesome. And then on this topic, Mike, is there anything you guys have done yourself to sort of validate and pivot towards where you are today with your product market positioning?
Should I talk about how we're kind of parallel path into a different industry? Is that
Yeah.
appropriate here? So yeah, the barrier to entry into launching a life science platform, they're high for software, instrument, consumables, all the testing, regulatory hurdles. And so, our technology, and I recognize not all are, but our technology is applicable in other industries, like in chem, where the applications are not sterile, they're not biological, the consumables don't even have to be clean in some situations. And so we can get our platform up and running, get to post revenue, get more data, you know, essentially get further by pursuing some of these other applications. So just like in life science, we're looking for collaborations with the research arms of chem companies that make products that are in like nutraceuticals, like supplements, or in makeup, like those types of companies. And then um, that gives our machine more runtime. We learn more about our platform. We get further with manufacturing our consumables. We just become more mature, and then we can kind of, in parallel, or in series, but I believe right now it's in parallel. We're going to go into the life science sector and just basically step up. Our consumables won't be. Um, they'll have to be, a path towards GMP. They'll have to do all that, but that's a strategy that keeps us moving and gets us data and is faster, much faster.
Okay. So I want to, get anybody else?
I was just gonna sort of jump off of that point because I think, what Mike's talking about is sometimes a big challenge, because you don't have a lot of resources, right? And it feels almost like you're 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 distracting the organization by doing something outside of like who you've identified as your ideal customer profile. But I think as Mike described what he's doing, it's actually, really, if you put a plan into place and you understand the goal of why you're in that other market and that you're not letting it distract you, right? Um, I think that is totally defensible, even to investors and who might question, like, what are you doing over here, right? If you have a plan, you can do these types of things. And I think sometimes, especially earlier stage companies, you just like, well, we got to stick to this because we got to stay focused. And like the calling, is stay focused, stay focused, stay focused. But you miss the bigger picture of, well, what if we were just able to do things a little bit faster and get some feedback a little bit faster? And as long as you're not expending too many resources, then that could be actually a way to accelerate you and get you to the path that you need to go on. So it's nuanced and in how you do it, but it's really can be very key to your go-to-market.
I love that, Jeff. And I think that's the challenge of being a startup CEO in some cases too, because there's this way and there's this way, and only one is right, but both can be right. You just gotta you gotta make the hard decisions. You gotta hear the data, but then figure out what the path is. And to your point, I think having it in a strategic format where you are understanding why you're doing the things you're doing instead of just throwing a bunch of fishing lines out, it's the difference. So I want to kind of move on to our next part here. And obviously the product market fit, you got to have that kind of figured out before you figure out how you're going to go to market. And so I want to kind of come back to Courtney as we kind of head into this next session. And there's a lot of there's a lot of tools and resources you've got to use or could use to sort of figure out what is the right market, where is the right place to put my resources. And when we did our prep call earlier, you had a number of resources that I thought it might be great to kind of go through and share with the cohort. So at least, it may not be totally suitable right now, but it may be suitable in the future, or at least something to know about as they're kind of thinking through these own things themselves.
Yeah, definitely, Jim. So there are many tools available, right? And it's good to be aware of what tools you can leverage and when, especially what budget you may have or what area and what phase of development or launch that you're in. So you've got primary, secondary market research, qualitative, quantitative, all these, buzzwords flying around. We talked about focus groups. That's a really great opportunity to get feedback. And if you can do those blinded, that's helpful. There's those key opinion leader product forums, where you can have that via webinar, WebEx, you can do it at a conference, you can do roundtables. I know Jeff mentioned that. I've really found that doing usability or workflow studies earlier in development is important. Once you have a form factor and when you're trying to understand how it fits into a customer's workflow and into their day-to-day and how you'll get more volume and more repeat use by understanding the workflow versus just like a one-time quick trial use. You can also do tools that you can just purchase, using different databases, right? So I think some databases that have been helpful in my career, AlphaSense, it's a really great market research database. It's got a lot of AI and market insights to help you understand your competition, trends in the market, a lot of analyst reports, SME interviews, those types of things. You can do a free trial. So I don't work for them, but I think that it is a helpful database to look into. That's AlphaSense. GuidePoint is another company we've used to do one-on-one interviews, to do survey work. If you're trying to get connected to the right people and you want to do it maybe on a budget, you can use a company like GuidePoint where you can go in and say, I want to talk to 10, physicians with this background, or I want to do a survey with, 30 people from this focus area. That can be a useful tool. There's also claims and sales databases. If you're at that point where you're looking at that specific go-to-market structure, how you're going to win, once you've understood who you are, what's your ambition, where you're going to play, right? There's a lot of the research and understanding your market, the market segmentation, narrowing on which segments you're going after and really prioritizing those. But then also the go-to-market and how you're going to win in the market. You might want to look into sales and claims databases. Some of those I've used, Clarivate for distributor sales tracings, Komodo Healthcare and looking at reimbursement and claims. You can understand what's actually going on in the market and which segments. It's really helpful also from a coding perspective if you're working with a product that is needed. So those are just some of the tools in addition to obviously secondary research reports you can buy. I find a lot of times those aren't as helpful, buying these one-off reports. The quality cannot be great sometimes. It really depends on the company and how well they did their research. A lot of times they'll run 3,000 to 5,000 for one report, and I find it more useful to do my own research using these databases and talk to actual people, using some of these services versus just buying a very generic secondary report. But I do find Kalorama to kind of be a company that's reputable and has great reports that come out in all these different areas. So you got to really be careful of which reports you buy if you're looking at secondary research. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully there's some takeaways there for people. And I'm always happy to talk more on these tools if people have questions.
And I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I do believe if you've got an academic co-founder who's still got access to maybe the university library resources, some of these things are maybe available there as well, but obviously not for commercial use. So, Jeff, I want to jump over to you. So we're kind of jumping in here, but like, can you kind of just give us your thought? Like, what is a go-to-market strategy? And how should it be kind of defined as a company's sort of stage of development?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think that's important, right? It depends on the stage of where you're at, right? It can be many different things. I think that I would say, so if we're talking about sort of pre-commercial, and that's a lot of the focus for a very early stage, I would just say that outside of just, having that product market fit, the key things that we try to get people to work on early are, we talk a lot about segmentation. We'll talk about that, I think, in the future here too today. But ideal customer profile, spending time writing it down, understanding what your ideal customer profile is going to look like, who are your buyer personas, working on your value proposition messaging, and then like how is what I'm doing, how are those things gonna help me close deals, right? And so it's sales and marketing alignment enablement. Like that, to me, that's a big nugget to like the go-to-market strategy and pricing and all other stuff will sort of come, and those are things that can change, but until you've really solidified those core messaging pieces and customer profiles and everyone knows who they are within the organization, a lot of things come flying in. You get a lot of people asking questions like, can you do this? Can you do that? And you can get distracted. So I think spending time and really understanding what are you trying to do, what is your messaging, and how are you going to respond, to your core customers, really grounds you. So we like to start there. And there's a lot more with go to market, but I think those are the key. That's the base, right? That you can build from. So that's how I like to think about it.
Okay. Mike, I'm going to come to you after Courtney here, but Courtney, from the big company perspective, what do you guys see as the core critical pieces of go-to-market strategy? And to tack onto that, when you are connecting with a company that you're evaluating or looking at, how do you guys evaluate that strategy? Does it impact your view of things? Do you just throw it out, or do how do you kind of like integrate that or look at it with the company you're talking to?
Yeah, definitely. So it helps when the smaller company has a good idea of who they are, right? How they think they're going to win in the market, what they're going to sell, who they're going to sell it to, how they're going to sell it. But in the end, I think it's always been a great partnership where the marketing team, the business and marketing team at the large company partners with that small startup to really understand the vision. And I think it's all about articulating your value, right? So it's tough to have a strong go-to-market if you're not able to articulate your value. And that comes through things like Jeff mentioned, which is really deeply understanding your value offer. And your value offer isn't just a product, right? It is a product, but it can be services, capabilities, what you're bringing to the table for that customer. The right segments that you play in is crucial. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's articulating that value. And then that is what you take into your positioning of how you're positioning a product into the market and the messaging that you create for the specific segments to, help them understand the value. So again, that articulation. And that's where communication, you can work with a communication coach, or there's a lot of great, consultants and people out there. Jeff mentioned his company here that can help you work on your value offer development and articulating your value. And then once you have that, it opens up the line of communication with the larger company. They can see the vision. I would say one other tip I think is really helpful that sometimes startups may overlook is understand your potential partner, your strategic, and you can do that, simply by looking at things like earnings calls, using these databases that I mentioned, doing searches. There's a lot of free information out there. You can look at investor day decks. A lot of these things are public. You go to the investor relations links on big companies' websites. You want to understand who the company is, what motivates them, where are they trying to be, what type of growth are they driving for, what type of, profitability are they looking for? And you want to be able to really articulate the value of your product that hopefully fits the growth profile and the profitability profile for the large company. So know who your, partner is and be able to come to the table with, we understand your challenges. You're looking to get into X market. You're looking to innovate here. Hey, we have this amazing solution that does XYZ. That's your value offer. And it will help you drive growth, above and beyond what you're looking for. And it'll help increase your profitability. Knowing those things and coming to the table really helps work with the big partners.
So Courtney, if I'm a first time technical startup founder and I'm like, I'm trying to figure this out. I've never written a go-to-market. I've never seen a go-to-market. I don't really know what it looks like. Is there like a template or basic sections that should be covered? Is it a document? Is it something else? Like what is the
For
synthesis of
sure.
this
There is.
process?
And coming from big companies, we've got all sorts of frameworks that amazing consultants put together that they've worked for years and years on and spent lots of money on, right? But the beauty of today is you've
We're
got
gonna share all those
ChatGPT.
after.
Yeah, sure, right? Just pull those out. But you've got ChatGPT, which knows all things, right? And so I tested this yesterday. I went on and said, like, hey, how would I develop a go-to-market for a small Biotools startup? And it gave me some amazing ideas. Now, that is not going to create your plan for you. That is not the be all end all. It's helpful to have consultant partners and people to guide and real people. But you can get started by looking for these high level frameworks, by using AI, right? By doing the searches yourself. They're going to give you basic frameworks. And I could compare that to what I've used, with the large company, very tested and true, robust frameworks. And, there's a lot of similarity, right? So, if you're looking for how to get started, I would start with ChatGPT.
Okay. Mike, what's your story with go-to-market? You've got a couple product market fits you've played with. You've told us a little bit about kind of these two market segments. Maybe they're sort of tranched in terms of the chemical versus the biotools. What does your strategy look like? How do you think about this?
So, well, I mentioned we built our technology to be versatile so that we can go out and do a bunch of experiments. Right now, we're focusing on education. So, conferences, uh, Zoom meetings, networking, website content. So, education is big for us. People have to know that we're here, that not just from a brand perspective, but what our tech does and what our value prop is, and then run real experiments with early adopters, biological preferred, and get as much runtime, as much data as we possibly can to validate that or verify that we have the right, we're focusing on the right problems. And then ultimately, our intention is to launch in R&D and PD settings. So we're not going for, we're not trying to get into GMP. That's a huge gap. There's a huge gap there. So, we know that, we know we're going into R&D, we know we're going into PD. We design our platform for those settings where it's not huge industrial equipment. We miniaturized it so that it can go on the bench. It faces the user. We specifically did it for these groups. And then once it's running in R&D and PD settings, then eventually it'll move up into, like a GMP manufacturing setting. And the only thing that we need to do now is plan for it so that we know how we're going to get there. We know like what our software has to do, what our consumables have to do. And so, yeah, that's essentially what our plan is.
So, Mike, this is a little bit off topic, but I am just curious, and I think it does feed into the question. But in terms of your GMP strategy, are so oftentimes companies in the medical device space, they'll sell a RUO and then a
Mhm.
labeled product. But it's the same back-end manufacturing line, just the label's difference. Is this kind of the same thing for you? Do you get efficiencies through kind of like having one manufacturing line and kind of targeting these, or do you have kind of two separate manufacturing pathways for your product?
Well, for feasibility studies, the way that we've always done it to keep costs low is we build cleanly. I wouldn't say sterilely, but we build cleanly and then we disinfect. So when we disinfect, it's good for all these inexpensive runs. And remember, we're more of a bootstrap method. So keeping the cost low, having everything gammaed or sterilized in other ways, it's just very costly. So for those types of experiments, we do that. For when we launch into the R&D and PD settings, post collaborations, once we're like selling the instrument, then yeah, it would basically be exactly what you described. We'd have an RUO version of the consumables, potentially different sizes, and they would say RUO, the equipment would say RUO, and then eventually we'd go through the regulatory hurdles to make everything GMP. but we're
Gotcha.
not starting there. We just have a roadmap to get to GMP. We're not focusing on that. It's just out there. It's just like, on the horizon.
That's great. Okay. Jeff, back to you. Again, kind of one of the challenges I think a lot of the companies struggle with is again, kind of like this. We got multiple market opportunities. We're trying to figure out where the most viable place to start is. Um, how do you guys think about segmenting and prioritizing your customer base? And how do you kind of make some real decisions in the market around these products?
Yeah, I mean, it's very product specific. But I think as we sort of talked about before, right? I think being in a market that is obviously unregulated, or people, you can get people who who can sort of play around with and give you honest feedback. A lot of times that ends up being sort of in those sort of academic labs, because they're able to kind of have some freedom in what they're able to do. So I think, sometimes when we talk about starting in academic labs, when people don't want to do that, again, we go back to that discussion about how Mike was describing his sort of path, is like, well, let's first kind of get our ground and our bearing on, what are the technical complications that what hurdles are we gonna get over, and then in parallel path, you're talking to the industry partners who are saying, well, if you can, deliver on these technical things, I need, the product to be fully automated, right? I think at one point, I was at a company where we had a product that everybody wanted, but in order for it to get into like the large CROs like Quest and LabCorp, it was like, if it's
Sorry,
not
Jeff, could I
automated.
stop you real quick? So you had a product. Who was the segment at that time?
The segment at the time was mostly hospitals, and some, yeah, mostly
Okay.
hospitals and academic
And
labs.
then you're thinking about transitioning, or there's something with the CROs now.
Yeah, so moving into CROs, it required full automation. So, it wasn't just about, you know, making something that worked a little bit. It had to be like from the very beginning of the sample coming in to going to, the end product, right? Needed to be fully automated, and that required a full rework of the entire um, product offering. So it makes a huge difference when you're thinking about individual segments and their needs. Sometimes they're really absolute.
Do you see that as a mistake in terms of should they have been focused on that CRO market from the beginning and put the product towards there? Was this something discovered a little bit later, or was this just a part of the product development growth strategy of sort of moving up market?
It was something that it was, if the company would have done it 5 years earlier, you could have seen a completely different outcome of the organization. So yeah, I think they realized it too late.
Courtney, how about you? Do you guys have any stories along these lines?
Yeah, for sure. So in regards to looking at, this, I would say segmentation has been key. There's been some great learnings, some lessons learned around making sure that your segmentation framework is really rigorous and moving beyond just firmographic variables. So first, like what are the variables or the different things that you're looking to segment your market by? That could be like Jeff mentioned, care setting. It could be a large hospital, small hospital, an urgent care, an academic, facility, reference lab. So that's firmographic, but you really need to take it a step further to understand the behavior that is going on, right? That drives what people do and what they buy, right? So are they cost driven? Are they performance driven? Do they want the best performing product? Do they need something that gives them a better workflow? And understanding how they're behaving. And then even you can go a step further, add attitudinal segmentation, which, is why are they choosing to make decisions? But for segments to really be meaningful and to be actionable, you have to understand, your primary, your focus, right? So I would say an example of this being working with a startup who came in and said, I have an idea, we're going to sell to these urgent cares and they're going to love this product because it has a really fast turnaround time and it does XYZ and it's going to meet customer needs, right? The challenge being though, when you looked at that segment, one, it was already a red ocean because there were a lot of competitors already there. Two, they maybe didn't care about, the super fast turnaround time. They cared more about the financial piece and they wanted something that fit within their bundling, their case rate bundling, right? So we only get $100 for every person who walks in the door. So your technology is quadruple what our existing technology is, right? So not just saying, oh, I'm going to go after this specific care setting or place, but I'm going to understand what drives the behaviors and the attitudes of the customers in those specific places, right? And so what had to happen then is going back and refreshing and reworking the segmentation, digging in and asking questions and spending a lot of time revisiting that and understanding, okay, we're actually going to pivot. Now we're going to focus on this other segment of the market. And it still has this large opportunity size. It still has this attractive growth rate. It's still going to do what we need it to do from a financial modeling perspective, right? It all kind of goes back to your business case, your models you've developed, what metrics you're looking at to meet your goals, you know. But the segmentation and where you end up targeting your go-to-market, that really is key, right? And it can make or break things. And if you come to market and spend all this time with a really great go-to-market strategy and you've targeted, the wrong area, and that area may just be too competitive or it can be disastrous,
Mhm.
right? And then people's expectations aren't met, and that's never good. So, I think the segmentation piece is key, and that's an area where if you need more help with that, reach out. There's a lot of people who've lived it, who've got the frameworks, who, are here to support, and it's important.
So, Courtney, thank you for that. In terms of like what Jeff provided, where you've got, any example could work, but you've got a product that when they went to a different customer segment, they needed automation. So they had to go back and re-engineer automation and put that in. Do you find that there's synergies between the segments? Like, are these, you get a feature for one segment, does that actually make you better positioned often in adjacent segments that it wasn't necessarily designed for? Or is it often more of just sort of like handling features that don't have a lot of value cross market?
No, for sure. I think most of the time it's synergistic, right? So when you're looking at what is the benefit that your solution's bringing, you've obviously got like the product attributes. That's like it has this automation, it does this, right? But then you also have, many higher level value beyond just that, right? How it makes people feel, how it helps their workflow, how it improves their business, right? So I would say the product attributes, that very basic level, that's often, swappable and synergistic across, different segments. But you've got to take it a step further, so in terms of how you kind of look at that, when you do your segmentation model, you'll see that there are many adjacent segments and you may be able to play in those, but it may be opportunistic. It might be like, yeah, it also kind of fits into large academic labs, but we're not going to focus our sales team there because XYZ, right? So I think there's a difference between really focusing and what your primary target is, and I think Jeff mentioned like your ideal customer profile versus, yeah, there's synergies and there can be opportunistic sales or opportunistic opportunities, and those can change over time. And that's where the pivoting, is important. So an example being like we had a product, it sold into one space, and then the pandemic hit, right? And then all of a sudden, this respiratory test that had always sold into urgent cares and doctors' offices, it became huge in pop-up clinics and in nursing homes and in schools and in academic centers and areas where it had never really been sold because of what was going on in the world, right? And so you have to pivot and say, okay, it still has its base attributes, but now how are we positioning the product and really communicating and articulating that value to these new segments? And those became really important segments, and they had always been really adjacent, right? And I think that a point just being making sure that messaging you're using is tailored to these segments. So long-winded way of saying yes, synergies, you're going to need to tailor your messaging and the way that you're articulating your value. But stay focused on what's the biggest opportunities, but be open to those opportunistic plays.
Mike, question for you. So, you've got a big, hard decision to make when you're a startup, and you've got some markets that are entrenched by unnamed big players, dominant players that have good market position. They've got channels, brand, everything figured out, right? And you're trying to go up against them. And there's a lot of different compelling theories about how do you enter a market? Do you go serve the customer segment below them that's too annoying but not enough value so you can kind of get your entrenched position there? Or do you build the Cadillac that kind of does the things that they can't do and kind of is a little bit more premier? And anything in between. How do you think about this, Mike? How did you kind of approach this, and where do you kind of position Real Reactor in the market in that way?
Well, I think that comes down to value prop, right? It's just understanding where our technology is different than the competing technologies and where we can just outperform. And then so yeah, we spend a lot of time understanding and conveying the value proposition so that yeah, we can just go right for what we want to do, right for the players that we want to use it. I wouldn't. And one note, by the way, this is kind of a side idea here, but um, I found that I didn't quite understand my value prop recently. The value prop, I thought I had a really firm grasp on it. I thought it was cost, scalability, and quality. Those were the three. And then I was actually having a meeting with a chemical company, and we were in meetings for a long time. And I asked, I was like, oh no, I was actually talking about the value prop, and they said, those are great, but that's not what we're interested in. I said, well, what are you interested in? They said safety, because their reactions in batch reactors are incredibly dangerous. And so I found out that industry, not necessarily the entire industry, but that group wanted my tech for a completely different reason than I understood. So that was a humbling moment. And so yeah, I guess my advice would be keep your value prop as an editable document, and as you constantly refine it. But yeah, I think if you can convey the value prop to exactly who you want to be using your tech, then just go for it.
That's great. How do you know? I mean, this is really a question for the whole panel. Any of you can jump in, but how do you know when your go-to-market is right and working? What's the benchmark? How do you know that you're not chasing a red herring and that you are, kind of having conviction to grow and proceed forward? I mean, I'm assuming the simple answer is maybe just revenue, but I'm assuming there's a lot more to it.
I think it's adoption. That's how I would measure success. And well, not just in adoption, but I would say if your technology is used for more than just a feasibility study, if it goes into if you can get it into a company's lab and they're running it and they continue to run it and it just continues moving and they start to adopt it into their workflows, that's a huge sign of success for me personally. In addition to obviously revenue, but I think one of the things I focus on personally is adoption more than anything else right at this point for new technology that nobody understands, nobody's comfortable with, and they want to see it running. It's adoption.
So
That's
there's like
success.
horizontal and vertical adoption. So you're
Yeah.
talking about kind of like growing within an existing customer.
Yeah,
Um,
I
exactly.
think related to that, but slightly different, and maybe it's something that's a little bit more of an earlier indicator. I would say engagement and evangelization, right? So you get the engagement piece, right? If somebody's really wanting to work with you, help you change some things, do the work, like Mike's talking about, but also then be able to tell others about it
Mhm.
and really want to passionately defend kind of or talk to others in their networks about it. That's when I think you really feel and can know that that you've got something that's really interesting, and those can come earlier, right? And you don't have to necessarily get to full adoption because sometimes adoption can take a year, right? And so those earlier indicators, I think, would be around how deep of an engagement can you get, and are they willing to evangelize for you?
And I would just piggyback on that, Jeff. I think there's some great work you can do around understanding the adopters. So, is there willingness to adopt, right? So, there's simple market research that you can do to say, okay, what is the percent of people that are willing to adopt out of a broader set of, customers that you're surveying? And then what is the willingness that they're going to pay, what you're looking to get for the product? And so there's different metrics that you can measure and say, is this successful or not? Are there more promoters of the product than there are detractors? What's the percent willingness to adopt in the key segment that we're testing? What's the willingness to pay? What does, that look like? So I like to use some market research to validate as well, in addition to how's the revenue, how's the adoption. But I have seen too that maybe at a launch, you may get the revenue and adoption right then, but do you have a long-term funnel, right? And will you have continued repeat revenue? And will you be, having growth and adoption at the rate you expect over like a 5-year horizon? And you won't know that just at launch, right? So some of these research tools you can use to model out the willingness to adopt over time in your target segments.
Courtney, I could follow up. Do you think about these also in terms of like your customer segment, like early adopters versus late followers? That whole,
Yeah,
the whole adoption curve. Um, how do you guys think about that? And I guess, I'm guessing a lot of our companies here, it really depends on the market they're entering into on what that looks like.
yeah. Sorry, was that for me or for someone else?
Yeah, I mean, anybody who wants to take it, but I am curious, like, how do you guys think about the customer profile in terms of because it's easy to get a couple of excited early adopters at that early adopter phase of the cycle, but maybe that doesn't scale into what the company needs as it goes into a much more maturing market. How do you guys think about that and manage it into your plan as
I
you're
can
walking
go
through the,
first. So I
yeah.
think piggybacking on what Jeff had said, so those early adopters are great for evangelizing the product and getting out there and being a promoter and speaking to it and, being a beachhead into the market, right? But then having that like 5-year plus plan with a funnel that shows like, okay, here's what our mainstream customer is. It's not the early adopter, right? A lot of times early adopters jump to the new shiny thing or they want to test and try it and they're more like research focused. So you need to look at like who's your repeat customer, who's your actual main target, and do you have a funnel right set up? Like, do you have these 5 large partners? Do you have, this customer base? And so maybe Jeff, you're nodding your head. Maybe you have
Yeah.
some good
No,
examples.
I think about this a lot because I think, early adopters often aren't that price sensitive. And when you talk about, as you're talking about Courtney, like how do you serve the bigger market? I see a lot of early stage companies, founders being like, well, people love it and they'll pay for this at this price. So I'm holding stiff at that price. And they didn't test the market of the bigger market. Where do you need to be at? And what does that competitive
Mhm.
matrix look like? And that's a really big potential mistake of just saying my early adopters love it. They're willing to pay this price. We're not moving off that price point, right? So I think that's, and sometimes you don't have to always lower your price, but it's about like how much value are you giving for that price point? And so does your product offering bring in enough value to maintain your price point? That's how uh, ideally, you'd like the product development pipeline to help you get that added value.
Awesome. Well, that's the hour. We'll shut it off here in about a minute. Are there any final comments before we go to the private conversation, kind of wrapping up product market fit or go to market strategy?
I mean, I just go back to it's not easy, right? And you've got a lot on your plate. So, I mean, use the network that you have available to you, and be willing to learn and try a couple of different things, right? I think that's my biggest takeaway.
Yep. I was going to piggyback and say the test and learn culture. So be willing to keep testing and learning and testing and learning and use your network. Keep building your network. Always be networking, right? There's so many great resources. I know Biotools, taps you into so many of those. And always reach out if you have questions. There's so many people who just love to support and coach and help others and bring these amazing technologies to market.
All right. Mike, you want to wrap us up?
Um,
Are you good?
I mean, I've got some stuff, but I think I'll share it in the next.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate